everybody. Thank you very much for joining. We have an interesting interesting set of panelists. Let us first go through and get us introduced. I'll go by the alphabetical order. So Keegan, you're first. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Keegan Hines. I'm the VP of Machine Learning at Arthur AI. We're a company focused on monitoring ML models in production. Prior to that, I was the Director of Machine Learning Research at Capital One, and I'm also an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, where I teach courses on statistics and machine learning topics. So yeah, thanks again for inviting me.
Thank you. Next, Madeleine. We can't hear you, Madeleine, if you can hear us. No. Of course, these things would happen. So while you are figuring out, let us go to Sahab.
I may interrupt that. You can just refresh your browser, and I think you will solve your issue.
Hi everyone, I'm Sahab. I currently work as Associate Director of AI Products at Merck. I've worked as a data scientist prior to this role, and I've worked as software engineers and engineering prior to working as a data scientist. I've also teach at Berkeley. I teach data science here. So I guess Madeleine is back.
Let us see whether we can hear from Madeleine again.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Refresh always works.
Excellent. Good. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes. Yes, I was just saying it's an honor to be here. I'm glad you can hear me. My name is Madeleine Claire Elish. I'm an anthropologist by training, and I'm currently a senior research scientist at Google. Previously, I led a small research team at the nonprofit research institute called Data and Society in New York, which looks at, as you would guess, social implications of data-driven development. I also want to say I am not here on behalf of Google. I am here on behalf of myself, speaking as an individual researcher.
Thank you, Madeleine. In fact, I think that's true for all of us. Like Sahab also was mentioning this one when we were talking about it, right? We all represent as individuals, not our company, and also we won't be able to talk in detail about whatever we are doing internally because these are all confidential matters. Right?
Yeah,
so,
I have to officially say it.
Yeah,
so I'm here representing my own ideas, nor Berkeley, nor Merck.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you. A distinguished panel, if I may say so. Thank you. Now let us introduce the topic. Of course, the topic is explainability. Let me talk about a few words, a context to think about explainability. What does it mean? So, of course, we start from models, right? Models and algorithms. Earlier, it was easier for us to understand a model, why it is making a decisions by looking at the algorithm and a few parameters. But things have, now things have become a lot more complex. If you are looking at, for example, a 3 trillion parameter model, right? By looking at the parameters, 3 trillion numbers, we won't be able to figure out whether it is a cat versus dog classifier or whether it is a traffic sign classifier or whether it is an NLP model. Of course, I don't think we will have 3 trillion parameters for a cat versus dog classifier. Still, it's hard to figure out. The reason is the algorithms are nothing but a model factory. What happens is we have the algorithms and the data and the training pipeline determines what an algorithm does. And in that process, they become black boxes. So that leads us to our next point, which is transparency, which is the details about the algorithm is necessary but not sufficient. We do more than that. Which gives us to the third point, which is interpretability. Interpretability, of course, is the engineering, the mechanics behind it, right? The intelligible analysis. It is the how to the why of explainability. So when you look at explainability, now coming back to it, it is the why. Why does some things happen and ability to explain them. Remember, if you look at it, nobody wants to predict churn. They want to understand churn, right? If the predicting churn is only a byproduct, you want to understand churn. So in that sense, explainability is interpretability plus business sense, which is an interesting way of looking at it. And of course, there is a next one is justification, which is a higher form. Just because you can explain it doesn't mean it is justifiable. Remember, we all have the whole, this is where the fairness and the responsible AI comes in. So in the end, like the EU draft AI regulation talks about, it comes to trust. When a model, there are certain things that the model says it will do that is written on the tin where it comes from. Is it going to do, is it doing the right things, and will it continue to do so? That's the question. And so these are the questions that we plan to ask our panelists. Interestingly, it's not only us that are asking the question. There is an RFI out, request for information out, from, I think it is from the Department of Treasury, the CFPB, Consumer Finance Protection Board, etc., etc. And they are asking similar questions about explainability and things like that. So it's a good, by the way, I have these links in my Medium blog. I put in all the RFI links and that kind of stuff. So now let us hear from our panelists and see what they have to, give guidance on for our regulators. So first question. How is explainability and fairness important to your work? We will go by the alphabetical order. Keegan, first, your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction and that setup, and thank you for bringing up that RFI. I actually was just reading through that yesterday as well, and encouraged to see the CFPB and other regulatory organizations asking for input on exactly these topics as they shape their policies. Yeah, when I think about fairness and explainability and sort of the intersection of all these important topics in our lives, I have to think back to a moment several years ago where there suddenly seemed to be an excitement that algorithms and machine learning might suddenly bring to bear objectivity to processes and decision making that were otherwise run by humans. And there really was a sense of excitement that this can only be better. These are objective mechanisms. And then fast forward to now, and we see that whether it's hiring or medicine or things like that, it's just simply not been the case. And that in fact, applying algorithms to to these settings and training them on historic data from the past, you kind of get exactly what you would expect in terms of recapitulation of the bias and the problems that were inherent in the data in the first place. So instead of using algorithms to solve these problems, they've just sort of enhanced them. And so, I think it's important to consider that whether it's transparency of algorithms or just thinking about outcomes, about how algorithms or technology are affecting people, it's something that must always be monitored and watched for, because it's a little too easy for things to go awry if you just hope that input some data and this mathematical toy is just going to make the world better. So I think that's kind of the tension that we're stuck in right now, is acknowledging those places where it's not going to work the way we hoped it would work, and what are the techniques we're going to use to make it better.
Thank you, Keegan. Madeleine, how is explainability and fairness important to you?
Yeah, I think plus one to everything that Keegan brought to the surface. I think I'll add another kind of spin to it, which is something that's really key for me is that concepts, values like explainability, like trust, like justification, they're not just technical concepts. They're social concepts. I would actually call them, in the machine learning case, socio-technical concepts, right? We can't think about the kind of social dimensions of an implemented technology, or we can't think about the technical dimensions of a technology apart from the social contexts and kind of power hierarchies and histories in which that technology is built and developed. And so for me, that's what's really sort of, that's a key framing of how I approach these problems. And I think the language that we use has a lot to do with how we think about these problems. And so as a provocation, I would kind of put on the table that the title of this panel is, are we ready to deploy fair and explainable AI and ML? And I would say no, because we actually absolutely have to stop thinking about deploying technologies, and we have to instead think about the task of integration. So if I could just, for a moment, explain what I mean. Deploy is a widely used term. I used to use it, right? But it's like a contextless dropping in. It's sort of like we build a thing and then we send it over the wall into society, and hopefully it'll work the way we intended. And it's this kind of contextless dropping in. And in fact, that's where we see so many issues arise around issues of fairness, around explainability, around trust, is that you can't just deploy something, you have to integrate it and integrate it into the existing social context. And like even the word demands us to say, integrate into what, or with what, or with whom. So that's a kind of perspective that I think social science can bring to these kinds of questions.
Excellent. Very good point. Very good points. Sahab, what are your thoughts?
So being trained as a data scientist, all the examples that we learn in school is usually through consumers examples, or the examples that are in public sector. So there is a social aspect of it. There is ethics and AI, in AI is being taught at school, and we learn it and we do it, but it's less from a regulatory perspective, more in terms of like a general ethical responsibilities perspective. So when I started my career in data science, it was in a fintech, and right from the get-go, I learned that I couldn't do 90% of the things that I knew I could do. There were a lot of red tapes, and they were there for a good reason. So I learned to respect those red tapes. They were for good reasons. And when I talked to my fellow data scientists who were working in consumer and retail and different in tech companies, the kind of things they were doing and the kind of things that I could do were very different. So as consumers are becoming aware, and the government are bringing some policies, especially EU, the shift is coming with the same kind of regulations as we have in other industries. So it's a good shift. It's a very good shift, and the reason it is because just because you're not a regulated, we think that showing ads or doing doing other kind of recommendation system has very little impact. We don't know that yet. We don't know the impact. We have all found out how Facebook created this the whole bubble wrap around us, and what was the outcome of that. So things that were considered benign are they really benign? So as a person who's living in the world where literally everything is driven by AI and machine learning, I'm very, very much interested in making sure we are protecting ourselves and we are protecting our kids' future, because our younger generation are with their phones and technology all the time, and they don't know what's going behind that. So we want to make sure, as a society, it's very important for us to be vigilant about this.
Excellent. The unintended consequences, right? And that spans generations. People, not people, the little ones, they grow up with an iPad in their hands. When I was a kid, that was like hundreds of years ago, we didn't even have TV. So at home. So anyway, that's a different story. Next question. So now that we realize that it is important, what barriers and challenges, right, exist for developing, adopting, and managing AI? Thank you, Madeleine. Now we have to look at it's not just deploy. Now you have to look at it and say, see, now I got it fine. Anyway, so it's not. By the way, the questions are being asked by our regulators. So it's exactly the same questions that they are asking. So this time, let us go from the from reverse alphabetical order. Sahab, you first. We can't hear you. I think you're on mute.
You're still on.
Yeah.
So I think we have to understand what is business is driven and when they use AI versus why, as a society, we want AI to be used, right? If we talk about the reason business uses to get, there's always a business use case where you want to get to something. So I'll give an example. If we create a diagnostic system, like in a hospital, we go implement it. Telling a doctor, a physician, that this patient may get a sepsis, has a value, but if you don't tell them why it's happening, they can't do anything about it. So it renders no value to them, right? When we go to the business, there's a lot of, I want to know why it's happening. I want to know why customers are not sticking to our plan and things like that. So there was a whole drive of causality, and there's a whole drive of interpretation that was asked. And unfortunately, a lot of data scientists started using interpretation, explainability as interpretation, and saying, oh, these are the drivers, what is driving your business, which is not true. And in this whole system, way of narrating things, the real value behind fairness and explainability kind of got lost. So I think we need to bring in why we want to be fair, why we want to be models to be explainable. What's the reason, right? We want to make sure we bring diversity of thoughts. We don't have there is still a scarcity of diversity of talent. And the thought process. There is still scarcity of data sets. The way the data sets are collected, a marginalized population gets ignored. And your model can only be as good as your data. So if your data was racist, your model is going to be racist. So those are the barriers that are there. And there's a lot more work that needs to be done before we are ready, as Madeleine said, to deploy these things. There's a lot of more conversation that needs to happen.
Yeah, thank you. Madeleine, your thoughts?
I think Sahab brought up a really important point, which is that, in her first point, she talked about how this is really about the world we're building, but then it's also about whether people are actually going to use the systems and trust the systems. So it's both it's actually a win-win if you get explainability right. It's good for the world and it's good for your product. But I think that there are a lot of challenges, like Sahab already again brought up, there's representative data sets, but let's just say that you have a representative data set. Let's say that you have built a diverse team that is empowered to examine these issues. There's still the challenge that there are no yet agreed upon definitions and standards of what constitutes fairness, bias, explainability, or even safety, or even what are the acceptable ways to collect and use data for the purposes of creating diverse and inclusive data sets. So I think that's both an opportunity of the space, but also a challenge that these are really hard research questions as well as applied research questions. There's a really amazing interdisciplinary kind of academic community that looks at this, that I'd like to say I am also a part of. You can find some of this work at conferences like the ACM Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency conference called FACT. But I think, and a lot of that work is theoretical, but there's more and more applied research. But for now, I think one of the challenges for practitioners is that everyone has to find their own way. And that means that the safest bet is often to look really, really, really closely at the context where you're going to be integrating your technology. What does fair mean in your particular case? Because there isn't going to be a one size fits all, and there's no gold standard per industry yet. And so what that means is that you have to take a lot of time. That takes an investment of time and resources and thought, and there's no kind of quick way to do this work. So you sort of have to approach these kinds of questions with humility and with a long-term view, and kind of build in the role for unknown unknowns.
Yeah, the unknown unknowns, that is where a lot of the things. And thank you. The other thought, like you said, there is no consistent nomenclature, right? There are kind of general understanding which are neither precise nor uniform. So we do have these challenges even by definition. So thank you. Keegan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Sahab and Madeleine have got it exactly right. The challenge for practitioners is a problem of choice. We are at a moment where there are many ways to think about many notions of fairness, many notions of explainability. What's the right one for any particular use case? I think that's exactly right. And in different industries, it's going to pan out what that is. And Krishna, as you mentioned, that RFI from the financial regulators trying to pin down what's the right thing to do here. Yeah. I'll just add sort of one additional flavor on that. If I think about finance in particular and the challenge of fairness, there's been an interesting historical background here, and we're kind of stuck in a paradox where when we think about anti-discrimination law going back decades, we've ended up in a situation where most lenders and banks are unable or unwilling to collect information about demographic data, race, age, and gender, because they would potentially run afoul of fair lending law and disparate treatment law. Whereas where we are now, where the technology has gotten, is a moment where you really could quantify and think about measuring bias and going even further. You can think about bias mitigation, and there's a lot of exciting techniques and algorithmic approaches to think about fairer algorithms and thinking about bias mitigation. But I think there's a kind of a funny tension in the finance industry, at least right now, between practitioners and regulators, and it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over the next 5 years.
Yep, and the same thing with the EU regulation as well, right? There are interesting backdrops where EU is thinking of becoming the gold standard, like Madeleine was talking about. Right? We have no gold standards, but EU is trying with their draft regulations. So there are interesting things from that end as well. Good. Yeah, the challenges are numerous. So the third question, good. So this leads us to our marquee question, right? What do you see in the future? So I'm going to preface it with a very quick this thing. I'm sure, Madeleine, you will like this in the sense that we humans are linear machines, right? We can't understand exponential, at least from my perspective. And our new overlords are double exponential. So what happens is it's very difficult for us to navigate in this space without various techniques, including social techniques. Right? It's like you well pointed out. So, Madeleine, a question to you. What do you see in the future? And would explainability help us to make a sense of the double exponential world from a linear machine perspective? Thoughts?
Well, I think so. A couple of things. I think this field, this type of work, is growing, and so in the next few years, we will see more and more of this type of work. There will be more focus on it from a regulatory level. Obviously, we've already seen that, but also from a kind of public expectation and even journalistic media coverage perspective. We'll see sort of growing coverage of both like the harms when this kind of work goes underexplored. And we'll also see a growth in, I think, a lot of the technical mitigations. Like Keegan said, there's a lot of really interesting new technical ways to think about this work. So in some ways, I'm very excited because I think it's just a growing space. On the other hand, I think that we're also going to see a lot of failures, precisely because there is such a huge gap between taking a technology or a technical system that sort of works in theory. Oh, this is such a cool idea. Oh, this will be such a cool mitigation, and taking it and having it actually work in practice.
Yeah.
And so there are going to be a lot of failures, not just in terms of business failures, but I also worry about the failures for the communities who will have to sort of suffer these failed experiments, whose lives will be shaped by systems that fundamentally don't work for them. Yeah. And so the businesses that will succeed will be the ones who take seriously these harms and these concerns, and to really take seriously what are now this kind of nascent but growing issues around fairness, explainability, accountability. The ones that succeed are going to be the ones that really deal with this.
Yeah, good thought. I'm going to take one quick minute. We are open to questions. If you go to the Q&A and add a question, I think we can, attendees can raise questions as well. So let me go to Sahab. What does it look like in the future? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm very optimistic about the future with a hint of skepticism, right? It's always moving, it's always changing. I love that how people are raising their voice, right? People are more aware. These things, the ML models are not new in the industries. They have been there for a very long time. Just people were not aware of it, right? So now people are, because of their extensive use of social media and how ML is used in social media, people are aware of it, and we have all experienced the consequences of these models. So I think many businesses go by that are not regulated will be forced to be more transparent to certain things, as well as the whole data collection method, right? All the data that was collecting for things that should not be used for is more scrutinized now. So I am very optimistic about the future, but I know there is a drive in AI ML space of mimicking a human brain, right? I think we're far from there. But what we don't realize that there's a lot of things going on in human brain that we can't really explain.
Yeah.
As we go further and further and try to mimic a human brain, we won't be able to explain. I can't explain why I like certain food. It's just that I like it, right? So if your model is picking those kind of things, we won't be able to explain certain things. So it's going to be a challenge, but at the same time, people are aware the importance of it. And I think this is not living in academia anymore. I think it will come to the consumers. I mean, Google has already academic research is going, but I don't think it would stay just to big names. I think every company that will be hiring data scientists will eventually be hiring one person who is expert in data ethics, just like they have data governance. There's going to be data ethics part of the ecosystem.
Thank you. Good thought. Good thought. In fact, only yesterday I saw one article which says AGI, the general intelligence, right? It actually is not a neural network or something like this. They were saying that the brain, like you pointed out, the brain thinks in a very different way, and it's very difficult to model. It's very difficult to represent. That was the question, right? The representation of what is going internal in our brain, which has been conditioned by generations of evolution, right? Excellent thought. Keegan, what are your thoughts? The future.
So, I think I would just like to elevate again a point that Madeleine made around the broader context of how we're using algorithms and how we're using technology in general. When I think about, fairness and measurement of bias and the technologies we can use to address it, it's important to remember that a part of this is a math problem. Part of it is an algorithms problem, but not all of it, right? There's much more going on outside of that. And so, I would hope to see a future where the whole process, from beginning to end, everyone's much more careful and, as Madeleine mentioned, thinking about where did this data come from? What went into collecting this data? What went into collecting these labels? Who's included? Who's not included? And even the question like, why are we using machine learning here at all? Right? Is there a simpler way to achieve the task we need to achieve? That's what I would hope to see.
Yeah, good thought. The standard this thing, right? Why do we use machine learning? Because it's there type of stuff, right? Why do we climb Everest? Because it's there. No, it's not. I mean, the one of the things are these are irrationally effective many times, right? And that irrationality is what gives us the trouble, right? They are irrationally effective. We can actually do many things, but on the other hand, they can't do things as well. So there is this whole dichotomy of things. One quick thing. I don't see any questions from the audience, which is fine. I have one question that I do want to ask three of you to say, what is your advice? Right? This is beautiful, right? This is this wider, this thing. A couple of advice from you to the practitioners, right? People who want to, I don't want to say deploy anymore, right? Who want to integrate. Who want to integrate AI, right? Literally, who want to put AI systems in place. What are your thoughts? I will start with Sahab. one or two advice, suggestions.
Yeah, so just like data science isn't new, people have been doing statistics in computer science for a very long time. I would say this work has been done, maybe not in like deep learning space, but for regular modeling space in social sciences and political sciences. There's a lot of articles and journals and books written on these. I would say, as a consumer, educate yourself. As a data science practitioner, you should know, because we are the steward of this. So you don't have to read computer science or algorithm specific technical papers. Read, expand your scope of reading. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah. So don't read about algorithms. We will leave it to Keegan. We will worry about the social aspect of things. Right? I'm just kidding. Yeah, no. Good point. It is not it is not just the algorithms, but you look more deeper into things. Keegan, what are your thoughts? 2 or 3 suggestions that you have for practitioners who are doing this now, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Sahab said. I think that, the educational paradigm is always focused on mathematical and quantitative techniques, and I think expanding your education into the humanities and bringing together groups of technical and non-technical stakeholders, whether it's sociologists or lawyers or compliance officers, that's only going to help things.
Yeah. Thank you. I was just looking for questions. Madeleine.
Yeah, I'll just be brief because I know we've run out of time, and now I see Aram. But to kind of just build onto this, I think, like I said, approaching these kinds of questions from humility and knowing what you don't know, and sometimes that can involve doing your own research, but often it can be reaching out to other experts and stakeholders, and not just stakeholders within your company, but within the communities and the organizations where your technology is going to be integrated. And so I would say, humility and speaking to more people and knowing that you have to allocate the resources for that in advance, right? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Aram, how are you doing? We are on time. I assume we have until 12:15, right, or 12:10?
Yeah, it's 12:13. Yeah, I also found it really interesting, and that is also one of my favorite topic as well. So I just jumped in. Do you think AI, our algorithmic biasness, transparency, our accountability, differ from culture to culture? Maybe something is very fair for one culture or for one race of the people, and that is not acceptable for other race. So, are we planning to handle that or not? Because whatever I assume or whatever I learn, I think we are just focusing on overall. We say this is AI, and we are, tackling with that fairness problem, but that fairness could be that solution could be problem for other culture as well.
Absolutely. Yep. This is a social question, of course. Madeleine, probably you want to take it first.
No, I mean, I'm sure everyone has an interesting response. I'll just say I think that's a really great point. And that, that involves who are the stakeholders and in what sort of cultures and norms do they live? Geographic cultures, or sort of geographically disparate cultures, but also even different cultures within the countries where you might even live. So I think this is an underexplored in mainstream discussions kind of question about the different definitions and challenges for questions like fairness and trust and bias. Absolutely culturally dependent.
Yeah, the cultural norms. And of course, there is the other side of the story, which is the world is flat. So what happens is there is a norming of this thing where it goes across. So have your thoughts on cultural implications.
So I know somebody who's doing research in a university reached out to me about a paper on this topic. And I can tell you a lot of time it's also we're talking in US and EU because those are the biggest market for the things that we use. But if you look at Facebook or any big company, that platform is being used everywhere in the world, and it's probably used more in other places and has more larger implication than there might be in US. So I think this is where it's always makes sense to have a diverse thought. So you can't take one thing and deploy into the other country. It's just like any marketing. If you create a clothing, you can't take one clothing and put it in the other market. It would just not work. So it needs to adapt. It needs to customize. So every time you deploy a model, you need to be sensitive to the local culture and religion and all different kind of socioeconomic and different demographical aspects.
Thank you. Of course, any interesting panel, it has to go over its allocated limit. So Keegan, you have the time, and you can take as much time as you want.
Really fascinating question. And when I think about fairness and definitions and measures of fairness, they're often motivated by different mathematical considerations and sometimes different philosophical underpinnings of utility and things like that. But this question around cultural utility is absolutely fascinating. I look forward to digging into that more. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. Good thought. I think thank you very much for the panelists. Thank you very much for the audience. Unfortunately, we couldn't see any of them, but thank you very much for